motor unit recruitment, and 2, stretch shortening cycle.
So that's when you get a bunch of cars together all at once?
No, that's not what that is.
The anecdotal, all right?
It's not even anecdotally. Guys,
opinion.
they do.
Here's
The thing,
all
guys.
high-level athletes take steroids.
But no, not all high level
All
athletes.
of them. Every single
it's not
one
true.
on the entire place.
It's not true.
Everyone who is stronger than me does steroids.
It's not true. But guys, a huge amount of people do dope. You get into this trap of I'm going to push heavier and heavier because you want that symptom. You want to get a PB. You want to lift more, and it's really easy to slip into that trap. And then all of a sudden, you just really have pretty lousy technique there, but you're grinding out these heavy reps. If that's the case for you, take the hit to the ego, back the weights way down.
If you're an accountant and you work for a really busy firm and you're on your computer all day, every day, and you don't get much time away from it, and you're just sitting in a chair all day long, you're not moving, you're not using much of anything. So of course you're not going to be able to keep any strength. That saying comes to mind, use it or lose it. It's true.
Secret.
You just want to be more like me.
Secret men's business. You might get an invite eventually. Don't worry, we're getting a new table soon. But don't bump it deliberately because then it's gonna. Don't do it. Come on, man.
How to?
Be professional.
Because it's not quite.
This is a very professional podcast.
It is
Welcome back to the Professional Big Flex podcast,
the most
everybody.
professional podcast that you will ever watch. Welcome back, everybody.
Ooh, all right. We have a question and answer time podcast for you today,
Yeah.
which are good. They're quite popular and they're fun to do.
They are.
And
They
we
are
get to
quite fun.
answer your questions. And they're actually all serious questions, which is amazing. No one tried to slip in anything below the belt there, which was a nice surprise.
People do that often, and they very rarely make the cut.
Yeah.
There's a few times they have. They've been quite fun as well, actually.
Yeah.
Glad that you humour the people every
Try
now and again.
to humour the people around.
Yeah.
But look, guys, if you're watching this or listening to this, first of all, if you're just listening to this, head on over to the YouTube page, the Strength Institute channel, and subscribe. Like and subscribe to the video because it's always better in video format.
It is.
And if you don't have a TV or a phone or a tablet or a computer, and you're somehow listening to this, I don't know.
First of all, sort your life out.
Go to a digital cafe and hire one and subscribe to our channel.
I mean, not to toot our own horns, but it's pretty fantastic content. So
That's right. And we're almost up to 500 subscribers, which is pretty cool. I think we're at like 472 as of this morning. So it's
creeping up there. It's getting better.
It's just trekking on up, which is pretty cool. So yes, if you hadn't done so already, please like and subscribe. Definitely subscribe, share, comment, and give a thumbs up. And that all helps the channel grow, which is great. Question and answer time podcast today. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different people, and there might be a couple double questions in there as well. So
Before we get started.
Yeah.
Before we get started, these questions and answer podcast, the questions come from our clients. We usually put it up on the whiteboard when we decide we want to do another one, and people just write down their name and a question.
It's true.
I would like a lot more interaction from the viewers, people who aren't from the gym. So if you like these podcasts and you want a question answered, comment on this video, go back and watch the other questions and answers podcast and have a listen to those.
Yeah.
And ask us some questions because these are quite fun for us. With a few of them, we have to do quite a bit of research and learn some new things.
Hey, not today though. All these ones were easy, guys.
They were actually
all easy.
but it's quite enjoyable for us. We like these ones as well. So think of some good questions and put them in the comments.
Please do, and do that. Ask us a question.
Nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it.
All right, so
So
we're just gonna
and here's the thing: is that because if you do that, and obviously we can't answer it then in the comments. I mean, we could, but we won't. What I'll do is I'll write it down. So the first 2 questions today are actually questions that were asked by Deb after or too late. She might have asked them right before we released the last one or in the comments as well.
That's right.
So if we don't get it on that one, it will be on the next one.
Yeah.
All right. And we're going to start that right now. So Deb asks, can you correct a muscular imbalance via volume and intensity on different limbs? So what she's saying there, I'm assuming, and I'm sorry if I overstep the line and just make assumptions here, Deb, is that if you have, let's say, a weaker left arm and you're on dumbbells and you can get to rep 8, no worries, and then rep 9 and 10, no worries on the right, but the left is like lagging behind, can you do other things? Could you do perhaps maybe train with a lighter weight with your good arm so that the left arm has a bigger stimulus, or could you do extra reps on the left arm? And the answer, Deb, is you could, but you probably shouldn't. Is my opinion anyway, and we'll get Adrian's take on this as well. But basically, if you have a limiting factor via a muscular imbalance, that muscle is usually going to fatigue out first. So if you keep putting the time and effort in, its stimulus will be higher. The stimulus that weaker muscle feels will be higher than the good one. And so it should slowly catch up over time. And then it's also really important and a great reason why we use unilateral exercises like dumbbell bench as opposed to just always a barbell bench, because it really highlights some of those imbalances and it gives the body a chance to correct them. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, it would be just a bit too hard to judge. I feel like I'm 20% weaker here, so I'll get a 20% heavier dumbbell. It's messy. And it's probably, you'd probably, because you're holding different weights then, your body's probably going to be twisting a little bit. It's just not right. So try to pick the same weights in each hand and just work as best you can within your recommended rep and set range. And then in time, you should see that balance out a little bit. And if it's an ongoing issue, it's probably an underlying either mechanical issue. So like someone might have, let's say, scoliosis in their back and things just don't quite line up the same. And one side might be a little hindered because of that. Or you might have some underlying mobility issues from an old tendon injury or ligament injuries, which means you can't get through a range of motion. So there might be some work that you could do on the side to help prevent those sort of imbalances or to help correct those as well as doing just the sort of standard weights.
So I read that a little bit differently. So the way I read that is, can you correct muscular imbalances via volume intensity on different limbs, as in different volume or intensity on different limbs? So if you were doing, for example, like bench press is the same example, dumbbell bench press, do 10 reps on this side because it's the good arm, and then do like 15 reps with a lighter weight on the other arm, or like something like that where you change it from side to side. So that's kind of how I read it.
Yeah.
And
I think that's what the volume part was. I was, I guess, speaking more on the intensity part where you would hold a 10 and a 12, but the same thing, 10 reps versus 15 reps.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same problems you encounter.
Exactly the same. The whole issue with trying to change things up too much side to side unilaterally is it makes it difficult because you can't really judge which side catches up. Generally, the rule of thumb I use is that if one side's weaker, then you go to the weight that side could handle for both sides and just slowly progress. Even though the good side's good, the good side's good. Like progress as the imbalances slowly work themselves out, so then you can work on strength after that. But if you start changing things from side to side, then holding different weights, you can create new imbalances for the other side. If that's stronger and better and it keeps going and getting better and this side isn't quite catching up fast enough, then you start to create new imbalances and problems.
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
Usually rule of thumb is just work with what you can do with the bad side, I guess, and just like very slowly progress until it catches up to the good side.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I concur, sir. I concur.
I don't. What's the?
I use some abbreviations. Just
What do you
use some shorthand there. Trying to save some whiteboard space. Deb also asked, basically, if you were to compare a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, and you want to compare their muscle mass to their relative strength. All right.
Oh, bodybuilder's stronger every day.
You shut your mouth. You shut your mouth when you talk to me. He's trolling you, Deb. So basically what you're looking at here is that most bodybuilders are mass monsters, right? Now, obviously, there's like new categories like men's physique, where they wear board shorts because they're losers. Right? And you have like the classic physique, which is what the Arnies used to look like. And then you have like the mass monsters, like the open Olympia bodybuilders now. They're just monsters.
They are also known as muscular potatoes.
Yeah, muscular potatoes is a great term. And they all wear chocolate body. So we're going to post some photos. You don't know what chocolate body is. It's the opposite of blackface. And it's allowed in bodybuilding, apparently. So there you go. But look, bodybuilders generally...
No, they don't put it on their face.
That's what I said. It's the opposite of blackface. It's chocolate body.
Body down,
Yeah.
But you're allowed to be whatever color you want. I watched one the other day. A guy was gold. It was like a statue.
It's like a statue.
Yeah.
It's like a bronze
It's amazing.
god cast and...
Just from the chin.
Yeah, chin down, neck down. Basically,
back to the question.
Your bodybuilders are generally going to be always looking jacked. That is their goal, is to look big and jacked on stage, which generally means low body fat and high muscle mass. Now, if you were to compare that to a power lifter whose goal is not to look big, but to lift heavy.
Can I make a comparison?
Please.
Like Nevin over here, who is not lean at all, but is very strong.
It's we call it the power belly, all right? Within reason, there's a power belly. It's a real thing. You can ask us about that on our next question. It's true. Podcast.
It's true.
Is that I would say pound for pound, powerlifters are way stronger than bodybuilders. Through history, you've had some absolute freaks like Ronnie Coleman, who has been shown. I think so. Here's the deal: he was known as like the strongest bodybuilder of all time, especially back in his day. He outworked everyone. He lifted more than everyone. Even when he beat Jay Cutler and some of the later Olympias, people were like, "Oh, I think Jay was in better shape, so he made an effort to go out there and like lift more weight than everyone in his training. Like, I'm the best, right?" And I think the biggest squats he did in a squat suit was like 800 and something pounds for a double. I mean, you're talking like powerlifters in squat suits are doing well over 1,000, like well over 1,000. You got guys like Dylan Hellriegel, who not in a squat suit, just in knee wraps and a belt, is doing like 455 kilo squats, which is 1,000 pounds. So powerlifters, and Ronnie Coleman was like 130 kilos. He wasn't a small man. He was big and jacked. So strength athletes like powerlifters, Olympic lifters are definitely going to have a lot stronger muscles compared to bodybuilders.
And it's because of the style of training, and this is really the crux of it. Hypertrophy and just general strength training, like strength and conditioning, are very different. They elicit a different sort of reaction in your body, and you don't need to, and this is a very common misconception, you don't need to lift heavy weights to get big as a bodybuilder. You just don't need to. It's all about the rep ranges. It's about high volume and lots of it.
And the intensity of it as well. It doesn't have to be a heavy intensity, but you're trying to take your muscles to that failure point all the time and push that burn.
But not as in, like, it's not so much the focus is in the intensity. Because if your goal is to get 5 sets of 10 on squats because you want your quads to be enormous, well, then you're not pushing nearly as intense as you are with a powerlifter who's going for like 1 RMs leading up to a comp. You know what I mean?
And also to sort of point on that is that bodybuilders wouldn't use a lot of the same exercises that you would see powerlifters doing. So like, are you're looking at bodybuilders, and of course they squat, but like squatting is the main exercise for squatting in powerlifting, right? You would squat. You don't do leg press because you want to have a big squat. Whereas
bodybuilders do a lot of isolation work.
Heap of isolation
work, like leg extensions, calf raises, hamstring curls, hack squats, like a million different exercises. Because the whole point is to sculpt their body. It's called body sculpting, bodybuilding. That's the whole point. So if you are just enormous, but you need to have your shoulders popping a little bit more, then you do a very specific exercise for like rear delts. It's very, very specific. And bodybuilding coaches are pretty underrated as well. The good ones are actually really good at that, isolating which parts of your physique need work, and then being able to actually, instead of just going to the gym and training, it's exactly what to train, what isolation exercises to do, what muscles specifically need work. It's more specifically about that. It's about the physique. It's not about the performance. Whereas powerlifting is the exact opposite. It doesn't matter what you look like. It's about the performance. It's about how heavy you can lift. Because every kilo more that you weigh affects your coefficient, and every kilo more that you lift affects your coefficient, and that's the difference between getting a gold medal or not in a competition. So it is all about performance, whereas bodybuilding, no one cares.
Right.
No one cares.
They just want to look good on stage.
Yeah, exactly.
But then also with like what you talked about there about finding the right muscle and isolating it and actually feeling that muscle work. Like if you're squatting, if you're a powerlifter and you're squatting, it's not just your quads that are burning. Like if you're like a real sit-back squatter, your lower back might be absolutely screaming by a heavy set of 6 or 8, Whereas if you've got a big back already and you just want to build your quads, you'll just sit in a leg press and just force the quads to work, So it is a really different type of training. And also, I mean, rep ranges as well for bodybuilding. They're doing, high reps. They're doing 8s, 10s, 12s, 15s, 20s, up to 30 reps. They're just getting this high volume to build that size. Now, in saying this, Deb, bodybuilders, because they have a giant, they call it cross-sectional area, it's basically just if I was to cut your quad in half, it's the size of the meat that I'm looking at, that good old meaty girth of the muscles. The cross-sectional area of the muscles is related to how much force that muscle can output. Obviously, the bigger the cross-sectional area, the more muscle fibers there are, the more work that person could theoretically do. So when you see bodybuilders go across into powerlifting, that's actually a great base for them because they have this big cross-sectional area. If they can then convert across and start slow, like they have this great platform to work from.
It's the part of powerlifting that nobody likes because it's a really important part as well.
Volume.
You usually swap between volume and strength. The volume and strength. You build a really good base with volume and then move into strength work from there. And even seasoned athletes go back and forth from volume to strength training, and it's hard, and no one likes it because volume is difficult. But that's why bodybuilders switching across, because that's their bread and butter. That's why when they switch across, they tend to just like kind of hit the ground running, so to speak.
Yeah, and a great example of that is Dan Efferding, who was a professional bodybuilder, absolutely jacked, went across into powerlifting, and was a multi-world record holder in powerlifting. Like he's just a unit, and obviously fantastic athlete, obviously extra supplementation, but regardless of all those facts, had a great base from strongman. In saying that, I've seen a couple of strongmen, powerlifting, go the other way, and because they had these like really dense muscles, when they start to do that volume, they blow up quite a bit as well. So everything goes hand in hand, but specificity is king when it comes down to like that peak end of mass versus strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just remember, Deb, no one really cares. No one really cares what you can squat, bench, or deadlift when you're a bodybuilder. So why would you even bother? You know, what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point? Look at my pecs. It's
Popping.
how I feel about that, anyways.
Yeah.
And actually, on
that's a great double question there.
It is. On that point, what they look like, you can tell when a bodybuilder does bodybuilding because they're just enormous beasts of people, depending on the category that they're in. There's a lot of powerlifters out there that if you saw them walking down the street, you wouldn't know that they could deadlift 300 kilos. You know, it's a very unassuming sport, and I like that. I like that a lot more. I feel like bodybuilding is one of those things because it's purely aesthetic. It takes away from the performance aspect. It takes away from the sport itself. So yeah, if there are, like we said, if there are any bodybuilders out there who are interested in getting into some strength training, like we said, there's a gym we know that's pretty good at powerlifting. And
it's the Strength Institute. It's this gym.
You've already
Come
got
to this gym.
a pretty good base. So I mean, if you wanted to learn something new this year, like 2022, new year, new me, I'm just saying, just throwing it out there.
Just throw it out there. Just go get double vaxxed and then come on down before Jan 31st.
All right.
Oh my God.
And on to the next question.
Yep. You can ask
Claire.
this one.
Okay, so Claire asked, how do I prevent knee valgus during squats? Now, knee valgus or valgus collapse is what happens when your knees cave in when you squat, which, if you know anything about squatting, is a big no-no. Actually, almost all of the time during everything ever. It should never happen, especially in terms of performance, sport, everything. It just should never happen. It's usually because of a weakness in your glutes. Usually, and because you have that weakness in your glutes, which the glutes are external rotators, your knees collapse inwards as internally rotates, and that's usually what happens when the knees collapse. So that valgus collapse during squats tends to be the main contributor as weak glutes, and the way that you can fix that is by strengthening your glutes quite a lot.
Get a big old strong booty.
Different ways that you can do that as well.
I think Adrian's spot on there. Usually the first thing people would say is you got to strengthen your glutes, because as you mentioned, external rotator is to take your leg. This is my arm, but pretend it's my leg, and externally rotate them. All right, so that's it. Externally rotate it. So if they can't keep up with the load that you're squatting or deadlifting, generally it will internally rotate. And your knees will cave in. Also, having sort of understrength quads can contribute to it as well if you're just not quite strong enough.
Usually like 8 times.
Yeah. So usually it's some sort of combination of both. Like you want to strengthen your quads and you want to strengthen your glutes. Always. Now, in saying this, guys, this is really normal. Now, even when you watch some of the best lifters in the world, you will see their knees wanting to come in, and they fight the urge often, and you might not see it on their first attempts or second attempts, but it's out there. You might watch the Olympics. These are the best clean and jerkers, the best snatchers in the world, and their knees will buckle right in. And it's not because they're doing it with poor technique. It's because they are pushing to the limit of their body.
And usually those technique issues that you have, or those little imbalances or little weaknesses that you wouldn't even see year round until you push that 1 rep max. When you're pushing your body to its absolute limit, those tiny menial percentile little reductions in performance here and there where you would see those like knees collapsing or shoulders rounding on deadlift, stuff like that, they really only come out when you're pushing max effort reps. So yeah, like don't worry too much if it is, obviously if they collapse so much that you just fail your squat, well then you've got some work to do. But those sorts of things, they do happen on those max effort lifts. No one's picture perfect. Actually, that I lied. There are a couple people. They're pretty goddamn amazing lifters out there. But you would see that in a lot of comps, and you do see it in a lot of comps, just because it's hard to be perfect and to have your body in absolute perfect shape. So yeah, it's not always a bad thing. If it always happens, it's a bad thing, but it's not always a bad thing.
Here's what I'm thinking. If it's always happening or happening regularly, so it's easy to get stuck into a trap, guys. So you think, all right, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do my session with perfect technique. And what happens is you have a really great session. The next week you want to increase your weight. So you put a little bit more weight on. And what happens? Your knees just a tiny bit, just wavering in a little bit. And you're like, you know, that's still pretty solid. And then I'm going to go up again next week. And you get into this trap of I'm going to push heavier and heavier because you want that symptom. You want to get a PB. You want to lift more. And it's really easy to slip into that trap. And then all of a sudden, you just really have pretty lousy technique there, but you're grinding out these heavy reps. If that's the case for you, take the hit to the ego, back the weights way down. All right? Take it back, and really, that should be the goal every time you train, is to have perfect form, right? And because we're not doing 1RMs every time that we lift, the vast majority of the time we're not doing 1RMs.
Yeah. So
So really, you should have pretty spot on technique all the time. So my suggestion would be to back the weights down, all right, and focus on having that perfect form. You can also do supplementary exercises like big glute thrusts or hip raises with a barbell. You could do more isolation work like lunge work, where you're sort of focusing on that glute and posterior chain.
you can even work the squat itself. You can even do things like pause squats, box squats, where
Tempo squats.
you go a lot slower with a lot less weight and work on taking the speed and movement of the rep out. It's a lot easier to work on your technique. You can actually look at yourself in the mirror, or if you don't have a mirror, just focus on the movement instead of just trying to hit hard reps and hit your usual squat technique. There's lots of stuff you can do, even different exercises,
Yeah, and
even
now-
supplementary exercises like RDLs, deadlifts, things like that. You can change and add those in to get some extra stimulus to increase the strength through your hips and back as well to help that out.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that this is the case. But if someone like Claire was to come from a sport like CrossFit, where they just, bomb it out of the bottom of the squat, pow, 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 right? Because they're trying to get lift as much as they possibly can. They're trying to utilize that stretch shortening cycle. They might be used to having their knees cave in and just be like an afterthought. So I would say, you're saying just change how you squat. Pause squats, fantastic. You can go down, pause at the very bottom, come halfway up, pause again when the glutes are starting to kick in. You can pause it in multiple spots, doesn't have to be just at the bottom.
Yep.
Also, tempo squats. So going really slow. So if you go down on like a 3-second count or a 5-second count and then pause at the bottom, all right, that's going to get rid of your stretch shortening cycle. It's going to ensure that you're doing a really good movement chain, because it's almost impossible to do a bad technique squat if you're doing it in 10 seconds. Try your best, do a normal squat. Take a 10-second count to get to the bottom. If you do it with bad technique, you'll probably fall over. So that's a good way. Do tempo squats. Really slow it on the way down. Pause. Really slow control drive on the way up. And that might be a good way. But I'll definitely back the weights down and work on being perfect form.
Back the weights down a lot. And the whole point of that, it's not necessarily about the weight. You're not trying to go heavy there. You're going slow enough that you can actually physically feel what you're doing wrong, and you'll feel yourself tipping forward or leaning back, or you'll see the knees come in slowly, and you have time to correct it. Because when you're hitting 1RMs, you're pushing so hard that you can't even see straight. So it's kind of hard to work on that when you're in your strength block. So that sort of stuff you can do with your strength block, sure, but it's best done in the volume block as well, because you've got so many reps to work that technique. By the time you've got up to your heavy strength block and you're doing your 3s, 2s, and 1s, you've done so much work on it that you don't even need to think about it anymore.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Fiona asks, during a break from the gym, what diminishes first, your aerobic capacity or your strength? So conditioning or the strength? All right.
This was an interesting one.
This was a fun one, Fiona. I like this one. And I did get onto the old Google Scholar there, looked up some peer-reviewed journal articles, and came up with a pretty interesting finding, actually. So I found 2 good studies, and I'm sure there was plenty more out there, but I found 2 really good ones that I'm going to refer back to today. The first one looked at an untrained older population. So middle to older aged males and females, non-gym trained. Okay. They did, I believe it was a 10-week strength and conditioning training block where they did fitness and they also did weights. And then they stopped training for 10 weeks as well. So 10 weeks on, 10 weeks off. And they measure them, their fitness and their strength at the end of the 10-week training block, or at the start, at the end, and then after 10 weeks of doing nothing, the detraining period. And what they found was there was actually more diminished returns, or gains were diminished in the strength area. Okay. And I was
When you say diminished,
they lost their strength more than they lost their fitness.
Yep.
Now, take this with a pinch of salt, guys, because we're talking about an older population that's not trained. Okay. So if you're an older population, you're probably going to have some reduced hormone levels. All right. If you're not training, you're going to get those newbie gains, but then lose those newbie gains pretty quickly. You haven't actually built the muscle. And those that do build some muscle over 10 weeks, especially like older guys with low testosterone, you're not going to be able to maintain that muscle that you've gained. It's going to go back into muscular atrophy afterwards. So that was kind of interesting. The one that I liked more was looking at highly trained athletes. It was a 4-week detraining period. So these are good athletes that are doing a high level strength training and fitness. And what they measured was, so people ask, well, how are you measuring their fitness? It was basically their VO2 max, so their body's ability to absorb oxygen when they're training, when they're aerobically working hard. So that they look at how much that drops, and also the stroke volume. So a stroke volume is how much blood your heart can beat per stroke. All right. That was what they were looking at for aerobic fitness. And then for strength gains, they were just looking at peak muscular force, which is a great indicator of strength. It's just how much force can this muscle put on this object, all right, to push it in one direction. So what they found was actually the opposite. After a 4-week training break, those people lost more conditioning. Okay, so they lost their ability to be aerobically fit. So what happened was their VO2 max dropped. Their stroke rate drops, so how much blood their body can pump per beat drops. As a result, in order to actually do something, their heart rate had to go up, right? So if you have less volume of blood pumping, you have to pump your heart more times. So they had increased heart rate, which automatically increases fatigue, also decreases the amount of substrates available for energy. It does a whole, bunch of things physiologically. So that one is what decreased the most. Whereas their strength, while it did reduce, it was much more minimal compared to the fitness. And I was thinking, well, why is this? They're not testing out of a peaking block. So we are not walking around year round every day ready to jump in and do a 1RM squat. You can't. It's impossible. If you want to stay there, you will burn out and just die. It's not going to happen. That's why people peak for events, ideally twice a year, right? Yeah. Megan, twice a year. Okay, so these guys are just doing general strength. Now, general strength builds good muscle, right? So what you'd expect to see is muscular atrophy. Okay, when you stop training, that means your muscles are reducing in size, the fibers are reducing in size and length. But really, you're not going to get any of that over the first 10 days to 2 weeks. Detraining usually starts after 2 weeks. And then even then, they're still retaining most of their strength. Now, if they were to test for 1RMs, their top range strength might drop down a bit more. But their general strength just only diminished lightly. Okay? So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And that makes sense too. You'll see that in a lot of athletes. And a great way to look at this is if you've played rugby, and we talk about rugby a lot on this podcast, is that if you're looking at an athlete's ability to be big, strong, and fit. And rugby is a great example of that. You have to be able to run around a pitch for 80 minutes and sprint and jog and sprint and all these intermittent
while you're doing it.
Yeah, and be heavy. Like even the backs now are big boys, right? Yeah. So they're carrying around a lot of weight. But then at the same time, they have to be able to brace for heavy impact. They have to be able to lock down at scrum time. They have to be able to lift in lines. They have to be able to secure balls at ruck. So it's a lot of strength required as well. Generally, you'll see people gassing out. They're still lifting the lineouts. Do you know what I mean? They're still making their tackles, right? But their foot speed comes down, right? So that's what you'll generally see with athletes. That does sort of make sense. I think what would be another determining factor, Fiona, would just be the length of how long you have as a break. Obviously, I think that's probably one of the main ones.
The length that you have on the break, but also general activity levels. That's why these are kind of hard to quantify, because muscle atrophy happens at different rates for different reasons. So if I was to punch Nevin in the side of the head while he wasn't looking and he slips into a coma for 8 weeks, how long were these people not training for?
So the high trained athletes was 4, and the untrained older athletes was older.
They weren't training for that long?
Weren't training for 10 weeks, and the athletes weren't training for 4 weeks.
So if Nevin just stopped training for 10 weeks and then got under a bar and squat, you could probably squat 100 kilos very comfortably.
I don't think I'll ever be able to not squat 100
Exactly.
kilos.
But if I was to knock you out, you were to be in a coma, and then you were to lie still in a bed for 10 weeks, there is not a chance in hell that you would be able to get up out of that bed and
I'm a bit of an athlete,
barbell on your back. Like you would see total muscular dystrophy. You would
atrophy?
Atrophy, sorry. Muscular dystrophy, atrophy, muscular atrophy. Like
Muscular
total,
atrophy.
after a while of not moving, it just there's a much higher rate of breakdown. And then when you get out of that bed, you probably have a little bit of trouble walking again in general.
Yeah,
Like, you
100%.
see a really big difference. So it depends on what they're doing. Obviously, the age makes a big impact, but it depends on what you're doing. So me being in this gym, if I didn't train for 10 weeks, but I'm still lifting things, spotting people, moving stuff around, but not training myself, I'm still moving a lot of weight. I'm still using my muscles. But if I'm lying in a bed for 10 weeks doing nothing, then there's no way in hell that I'd keep any of the muscle that I've got.
I'm a pretty good example of that. I had literally about 7 weeks off from some injury and everything like that, but I was still moving around the gym, spotting people, loading plates all day. And when I started squatting again, yeah, my weights were down, but like I still could do everything and it wasn't that bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I ran a marathon a year and a half ago. Get me to go and run a marathon. Get out of here. Like, no, I will not. Even though all you need is time. But yeah, no, I would not do that. So I think, and what Adrian said was actually really, spot on, was that it depends on your lifestyle. If you're a farmer and you're ripping out fence posts all day, but you're not hitting the gym, you're going to retain a lot of your gains.
It probably doesn't matter.
It probably doesn't matter.
Go to the gym.
You probably don't need to go there. If you're ripping out tractor tires and pulling out fences and like shearing sheep and throwing them around, like you're a really physically active person. Like you're going to retain a heap of strength.
If you're an accountant and you work for a really busy firm and you're on your computer all day, every day, and you don't get much time away from it, and you're just sitting in a chair all day long, you're not moving, you're not using much of anything. So of course you're not going to be able to keep any strength. That saying comes to mind, use it or lose it. It's true. You've got muscle in your body. It's resistance training. Everything is heavy. You're using the muscle you have. If you're not lifting, moving, being active, then of course you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
This has been really bugging me. So I found a study that I was reading a while ago. I've been racking my brains today trying to find it, and I couldn't find it. But it was much the same thing. There was a bunch of different control groups, roughly. There's a bunch of different control groups, people who had not trained and started training. Then there were people who were already training. Then there were people who were only weight training, people who were only doing cardio, people who were doing both. And the study found overall, and it was like a big study, it was 140 people, something like that. It was like quite an extensive one. And over 6 weeks of training and then 6 weeks of not training, they tested max 1RMs and force output. And then they did VO2 max testing for all of the control groups. Basically, there was a diminish in both the VO2 max and max strength, but strength diminished at a much slower rate than the VO2 max did. And it's bugging the crap out of me that I can't find it.
That's right.
I was looking everywhere.
We'll have a look for it.
It's really annoying me. I'm going to try and find it. I've saved it somewhere, so I'm going to try and post it in the.
But it's a great question. I really like that question, Fiona. So that was a nice one.
Yeah.
All right. What's next, Adrian? What's next on the question list?
Next up, we've got. See, this one I don't really understand. This one, you have to elaborate. But Grace said, "Why is rep 1 so hard?"
So actually, what she's referring to is like when she jumps under a squat bar, like rep 1 always feels like, or like a deadlift, for example. Rep 1, oh man, that one just didn't feel good, and then like they get smoother as she goes.
But is this
So
like
why is rep 1 so hard?
rep 1 of like a 1 rep max or of like 10 reps?
No. Rep 1 of a set of 6, of a set of 8. Why is rep 1 like probably not for like real high volume stuff because it's a lighter weight, but like why is like, for example, if you're doing a heavy set of 5, why is rep 1 sometimes really hard as the first rep, and maybe reps 3 and 4 feel like the best reps?
I feel the exact opposite. I don't know. I'm not sure. What do you think, Nevin?
Ooh,
Why do you believe that rep 1 is the hardest rep?
Oh, pick me. It's the I believe, Grace, this has got to do with your stretch shortening cycle. So if you are standing on a deadlift platform,
Okay.
all right, well, it's got to do with 2 things. 1, motor unit recruitment, all right, and 2, stretch shortening cycle.
So that's when you get a bunch of cars together all at once?
No, that's not what that is. So basically, we'll go over the stretch shortening cycle first. So when a muscle stretches in one direction, has these little things called Golgi tendon organs, and they can tell that your muscle is stretching, and they send a message to the brain saying, "Yo, we're stretching, and if we keep stretching, we are going to hurt ourselves. We're going to tear." And so then the brain sends then an impulse back down to the other muscle, right? Because muscles work in pairs. Bicep will curl this way, tricep pushes this way, right? So what happens is it sends a message to your other muscle saying, "Hey, contract harder quickly the other way, so you're not going to tear anything," right? And that is a defense mechanism that the body has in place to not hurt yourself.
Can be
because if you had no inclination that you're going to hurt yourself if you kept stretching something, people would get hurt all the time. Yep. There's a reason why people stop moving in directions because things are hurting.
If I went like this, at some point, no matter how hard I push, it won't dislocate, right? Nev can dislocate it. I can't. I squeeze and nothing happens because my body is saying end range. If I didn't have that, I could do this and everything would keep going and my muscles would pull my joint apart, right? So you need to have an end range where that's finished. Otherwise, you turn your head and pop a disc.
It doesn't even need to be end range. Like if you're just really unflexible and you have really tight hammies and you try to like touch your toes, well, maybe you can't do that. If someone was to force you down, you'd probably pull your hamstring.
One of two things is going to happen. You'll either stop or you will tear your hamstrings.
Right.
So your body is pretty clever and doesn't let you do that.
Yeah. So what happens is it sends this impulse back down to the antagonist muscle, the other muscle, and tells it to contract harder the other way. So let's say if we are, a good example of this is bench press. If you will see a lot of people just go down and bang it straight back up. They're using a stretch shortening cycle. Their pecs are stretching, all right? And as the pecs stretch, it says, no, push back the other way quickly. So you go back the other way, okay? With a deadlift, for example, you are starting at the bottom in a dead stop position. There is no stretch shortening cycle. So that first rep is hard. Now keep in mind, even though there's a small pause after, especially in this gym, we always recommend pausing every rep of the deadlift, is that when you are at the top and you come back down, even though you pause for a second, you still get the benefits of a stretch shortening cycle, not the full amount. Touch and go would give you the full amount.
Potential energy and elastic energy.
Correct.
It builds up over time and it lasts a little bit. So unless you do a complete still pause for a few seconds, I can't remember how many.
I think they said at 5 per second, so you have 100% reduction, or 8 per second, so you have 100% reduction of stretch shortening cycle, but you need to pause for a long time.
Quite a while.
So once you start going, Grace, it's usually a little easier because you have this stretch shortening cycle. Also, if you're not ready for the intensity, so for example, if you were to just chuck 100 kilos in the squat bar and try to squat it, you haven't activated those muscles yet. They're not awake. They're not ready to go. So you're not recruiting as much muscle fibers as you can. Whereas if you were to go 40, 60, 80, 90, and then try 100, it's not just warming the body up. You are slowly increasing the amount of muscle fibers and motor units that you're recruiting for that lift.
You're able to actually recruit more to use more.
Correct.
And that's really important as well. So that's why a lot of people injure themselves in the gym when they say you haven't warmed up enough. That's why, because you could be lifting with 40, 60, 80, 100, and then going from 100 and then hitting some heavy lifts after there instead of doing like one set with the bar and then starting at 100. You're actually not engaged enough and utilizing the right muscles enough. So you could lift that weight, but then instead of everything that should be working, smaller key muscles work and you pop a disc or pull something or strain something and that's a big part of why people injure themselves a lot in the gyms. They don't warm up well enough. When you're lifting heavy weights, you really need to prime your nervous system to be able to perform at that level.
Yeah,
it makes a big difference.
100%. Yeah. So I think that's why sometimes rep 1 can feel hard, and once you get it going, it's good. It's probably a little bit of a stretch shortening cycle going on there, also a part of just that central nervous system and just priming the muscles to be able to fire off.
I think there's a third reason. I think there's another reason. And this one I see a lot in this gym. I see a lot, let's call it a psychological reason why, right?
What?
People are scared. This happens a lot, especially with squats.
They don't have a lot of scaredy cats.
Unrack the bar, and they go like this. Oh, that's really heavy. And then we go, you got this, be confident. And they do the first rep and they go, oh, okay. And then they keep going.
Yeah.
Because it feels a lot heavier than it is. You're a little bit apprehensive, a little bit unsure of yourself. And then you do it and you're like, oh, okay, I got this. And then that confidence kicks in as well. Mm-hmm. That is, I see that quite a bit too.
Yeah. Andrew asks, with Olympic lifting or weightlifting leaving the Olympics, which strength sport would you like to see replace it and why? I'll let you go first.
This was a good one. I personally would like to see just something weird and obscure that we haven't seen before. You know, like open the world up to something crazy.
But, like what?
All the ones that I really like are already in there.
No. What strength sports should go to?
Arm wrestling.
You would like to see arm wrestling in the Olympics?
I would love to see arm wrestling in the Olympics. They've already got their own like massive competitions. They don't need to be in the Olympics. That would be cool. You want to test the strength? Let's throw down. One of the oldest strength
what about the Russian
tests of all
What about
time.
the Russian slap one? No,
yeah.
no.
CTE,
You know what?
You'd see people die because of that. Can
So,
you imagine the best
like,
slappers in the world?
Yeah, that'd be terrible. Not the Olympics. It would be terrible.
Die.
All right. So all right. So you would like to see it replaced with, and first of all, it's ridiculous that they're actually removing it.
It is.
Yeah, it's so stupid. They're removing weightlifting.
I personally don't think it's going to stick.
They're going to.
I think we made a bet that
Yeah.
it's going to be that decision is going to be revoked because so many people tune in to watch the Olympics specifically for weightlifting. It's like it's almost iconic as part of the Olympics because you see those weightlifters doing those lifts. Like it's not even called Ollie lifting, it's called weightlifting, but it's so big in the Olympics that people call it Olympic lifting.
Right.
So you know what I mean? Like, how can you take something that's so iconic away
Well,
from...
I think they're going to. They are going to. They're keeping BMX, skateboarding, and rock climbing in, and they're taking out weightlifting,
Just ridiculous.
and something else.
Well, the reason why it really bugs me.
Yeah. Why does it bug you, Adrian?
Well, the reason why they're taking Olympic lifting, weightlifting out of the Olympics is to try. It's because too many people are doing steroids, really, and they're having trouble regulating it. So they're like, "Oh, you're all a bunch of cheaters." Well, yeah, everyone, everywhere, in every sport,
At the Olympics.
does that.
There's-
If you think that there's only a few people doing steroids at the Olympics, you're dreaming. Most high-level athletes do this unofficially, anecdotal. All right,
It's not even anecdotally, guys.
Opinion.
They do.
Here's
The thing,
all
guys.
high-level athletes take steroids,
But no, not all high level. Not all high level
all
athletes.
of them, every
No,
single
it's not
one
true.
on the entire planet.
It's not true.
Everyone who is stronger than me does steroids.
It's not true. It's not true. But guys, a huge amount of people do dope because
They do.
Yeah, and there's been I've got to look up what this is called. But basically, they asked a heap of athletes, and it's got a specific name now. You can Google it. They asked a bunch of athletes if you could take a drug that would guarantee you gold at the Olympics, but you would die early, would you take it? And like 90% of people said yes, because of course they're there for
Victory
glory,
or death,
right?
exactly.
So here's the problem: is that doping is ripe in the Olympics. If you think it's not, you're crazy. They just have stuff that you can't even test for right now.
Yeah.
First of all, there's ways to get around the current testing, and then they have stuff that they can't even test for.
Well,
And what they do is they retrospectively test things. From the London Games, they have now taken back like 70 gold medals or something from people that were caught cheating years ago.
And you can't beat progress. Like the tests that they have now, there's very intelligent people who are making these steroids who know about the test and what the testing is. And so they develop these new steroids they don't have tests for yet. And then they do this, and then the testing catches up. And then they do this, and the testing, and it's just always been like that.
Right. What they need to do is just have an open games where people can take whatever they want, and it's just the all-time
keep
list. And
saying this.
you can be natural, you can be a fake natty, you can be a
boo.
full-on
What they should
gearhead,
do
and you just go for it.
Is they should be the Olympics and the ex-Olympics, all right?
Ooh,
The Olympics
ex-Olympics.
is natural, all right? And if you test positive once, banned for life, forever, for the rest of your life in both of the Olympics. So you've got an Olympics and an ex-Olympics. In the ex-Olympics, you can take as much steroids as you want. You can do whatever you want. You can be the biggest potato that you could possibly be. You want to be 200 kilos and you want to clean and jerk, snatch 500 kilos? Go for it. I would love to see that. And so would everyone. Everyone everywhere would tune in to watch that, right? What can the strongest person in the world with as much steroids as they can fit in their fat face to make them as strong as possible, what can they do? That is amazing. I would love to see that, right? That would be something you'd watch because then you have a comparison, right? The strongest, most amazing athlete, natural. What human performance can actually do just naturally versus what science can put into a person to make them do.
Right.
That's incredible, right?
Yeah.
That would be cool. I would love to see that.
I've never seen you so passionate about something.
Because it's ridiculous. Everyone, and this is the thing that bugs me about it, right? This is why I get so heated about this.
Please tell me.
A lot of people who get caught cheating, they get done dirty, right? And all these papers are like Lance Armstrong, how could he do that? He lied to all of us. He was awful. He was amazing.
He is the best endurance cyclist
He is the best.
of all
but he's
time.
a cheater. You know who else was cheating?
The next 17 people.
Every other person that he raced against forever.
The next 17 people have since tested positive.
All were on the same
everyone.
level as he was, and he
Right.
was still better. So it's like me versus I'll clone myself. Boom, there's another Adrian here, right?
It'd be terrifying.
I take steroids, and he doesn't take steroids.
He would beat the crap
one's
out of you.
obviously going to
Oh,
win,
you'd be-
right?
yeah.
But
The steroid
I
one.
can perform as hard as I want without steroids and never get close to this guy. But we both take steroids, and I go to a different gym. I get a different coach, and then clone Adrian goes to another place. We train differently, has a slightly different work ethic. If we're both taking steroids and we're both roughly the same and we're both competing against each other, one person is still going to win. If I work harder than someone else, if we're both taking steroids, if I work harder, if I train more, if I sleep more, if I say no to drinking more, I don't socialize, I put my entire life into training, and I'm still just better than you, I'm still just better than you.
Just better than you.
That's how it works. That's why you have those people that are the best. How many times did Lance Armstrong win?
Seven.
It wasn't once.
7.
It wasn't twice. It wasn't
seven.
3 times.
Seven
I could keep going.
It was 7
He's
times.
the best,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't matter because all those other people were on steroids as well. They just can't out 17 people at once and then ruin cycling and have it taken out of the Olympics. It's just the way that it works. So
Anyhow,
it
I think we've
happens, right?
actually gotten way off topic.
I get heated up. It really grinds my gears.
So let me tell you what I think, Andrew. With weightlifting, leaving the Olympics, what strength sport would I like to see replace it? Adrian says arm wrestling. I would say none. And that's controversial. And here's why.
Because you really like skateboarding?
No. Hey, not a real sport. Get out of the Olympics. All right? No, here's why. Is because, and I love powerlifting and strongman. I think they're great. It needs to be something that is standard. You cannot standardize strongman. It's one of the beautiful things about strongman is that every event is different. You need to train for a specific event if you're going to the Olympics. If you want to be the best in the world, you got to train for something specifically. I don't want to see who's the best over 20 different events and this and that. Right? It doesn't work that way. The Olympics is about who's the best at this. Powerlifting is 3 lifts, and I prefer powerlifting to weightlifting. They have the same problems in trying to get clean athletes that all strength sports would have. But I think the 3 lifts would make it drag on a lot longer than 2 lifts. And to be perfectly honest, there's too many people that do weird stuff that makes powerlifting look bad. Like if you see someone with a crazy arch, for example, and they have a 3 centimeter range of movement on bench, or you see a tiny person with a wide sumo stance deadlift and they pull the bar about 6, like that's not, yeah, it's impressive. They can lift a lot of weight, cool. But you can't get around. You can't do that in a clean and jerk and a snatch.
Yeah.
You can't cheat it with like
still
leverages.
Have to lift 200 kilos over your head.
It's insane. So I actually think that weightlifting, as much as I prefer other sports like strongman and powerlifting, I think weightlifting is the perfect strength sport for the Olympics.
Yep.
But now that you said arm wrestling, I think that's great too. And I would love to see people do some arm wrestling.
I think the only problem with arm wrestling is that there'd be so many broken bones.
Yeah, people break
their arms a lot, and they're usually pretty messy breaks too.
So, I think I would like to see nothing replace it. I'd like to see them pull their thumbs out, kick skateboarding to the curb, and just legalize steroids in the Olympics. Just let them do their thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, next question. So we got Byron. Pros and cons in a wide stance squat, execution and tips. So what are the pros and cons of a wide stance squat? So are we talking like, I guess, wide stance low bar squat?
Yep.
Right? Okay,
yep.
So you'll have to probably put a picture up for this one. So the people who don't know the types of squats, we've got
narrow stance high bar.
Narrow stance high bar. I was going to say conventional.
Wide, high bar, yeah. And low bar wide stance.
Yeah.
Generally, what you're going to do is you're looking at leverages. We're talking about leverages now. So, first of all, not everyone born equal, all right? If you have...
Racist.
Hey, when it comes to biomechanics and the human's physiology...
Not about the color of your skin, you awful, horrible
We're talking about biomechanics. Is that some people, at the hip angle, where your femur goes into your hip socket, if you have a different angle to someone else, it affects how deep you can squat in an upright position, okay? That's just facts. It's not being hippist or a femurist. It is just the way it is. Also, people with really long femurs and long legs generally need to do more of a sit-back, wider stance squat. Shorter people with shorter femurs, shorter legs, with the correct height angle of the hip can literally squat straight up and down. So they make great Olympic lifters, right? So one, it could be
impressive Chinese.
It could just be why do people do it out of necessity? That could be a difference. You know, you just biomechanically are more suited to doing a wider stance squat. What are some of the pros and cons? If you are a really quad dominant person, it would be a con because you use more quads in an upright position. So when you're doing a wider stance sit back squat, you're going to be using more posterior chain, more hammies, more glutes, more lower back.
And depending on how much, like how far down you can get the bar and how far back you have to sit, it's very similar to a deadlift with some people. You get that really, really dominant hip hinge more than like the bending at the knee.
You reduce the range of motion that the knee has to bend as well. So that could be a pro. So one, the sit back squat is going to be more suited for someone with a strong posterior chain. And you also, a positive of it is you're doing a smaller range of motion. You're maximizing your leverages. But the cons are if you're quad dominant, it might not be great for you.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. And I think the reason why Byron asked this is because he's had a knee injury and he had full range of motion, then had a knee injury, and now he's just limited in his range of motion. And we can't squat as conventional anymore. So we've switched to low bar. And the reason why I did that is because now he shoots his hips hips way back, and his knee bends just more than 90 degrees, but barely. And it's perfect for him because he can load that up all day long, as heavy as he wants, and he isn't going to have any issues with that knee. So we switched to that stance just because of that knee injury. So that's actually a good point as well for a lot of people who can't squat ass to grass for whatever reason. Maybe they just
You can try a bit more of a low bar.
or they have they have some sort of injury that limits their range. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
The cons, I see a lot of shoulder. I've seen a lot of shoulder injuries.
Yeah, shoulder injuries for sure, because it's like really forcing it down your back. It can really strain rotator cuffs. You can have sort of some mid-back injuries as well.
Say low bar, you're trying to squat heavy, right? So let's say, for example, 200 kilos. Now I can rest 200 kilos up on my traps here and just stand up with it. But low bar, it almost sits across like the bottom of your scapula. It can get quite low. So you see people with their hands jammed in, wearing wrist wraps, and it sits in your hands more than it rests on your back. And that's a lot of weight to be holding in your hands behind your shoulders than letting rest on your shoulders. So if you don't have the strength, if you haven't conditioned yourself and your shoulders to handle that weight in that, it's a very compromising position. I've seen a lot of rotator cuff injuries. I've seen a lot of like joint injuries, wrist injuries. It's a lot of weight to be holding in your hands in such an awkward position if you haven't conditioned for it. So that's a con, is it can be pretty unforgiving on your body.
We actually watched a video just this morning of Mark Bell doing a wide stance squat where he got popped out of the bottom because his knees buckled in. So here's when talking about execution and tips is that how wide should I go? You should only go as wide as you can maintain a strong structure. So basically, the same rules apply. Like if your knees are caving in, if you can't keep your knees out and over your toes, or tracking in the same line as your toes and knees, it's too wide for you. And what will happen is it'll push you into a really shitty position at the bottom and a much higher chance of hurting yourself. Also, you need to work on, if you're in a wide stance squat, work on strengthening and lengthening and getting better mobility through your hip flexors. So there's not your hip flexors, your adductors, the inside of your thigh, and your hamstrings, because they get a heap more stretch to them. So there would be some limiting factors. How tight is on your lower body? Like you want to be loose enough or flexible enough that you can actually get into a strong position. And that would be probably the main limiting factor that you should work on. Yeah. And strong enough a body to be able to, support that bar on there.
Yeah. Well, doesn't matter what squat you do. If you start all the way down here from the very beginning, put a barbell on your back and then work your way up to your heavy squat, chances are you'll probably be fine. But switching from a conventional to a low bar squat all of a sudden is not a good move.
Yeah, take your time with it.
It's almost like a different exercise. It's like comparing squats to deadlifts. You use a lot of similar muscles, but it's a very different move.
It's different mechanics.
Exactly. So if you're looking at the pros and cons of each, there are a lot of different pros and cons, and you do it for a lot of different reasons. But if you start small and work your way up slowly, there's no reason why you couldn't do either of them.
Yep. Jess asks, what are some tips and tricks to stay motivated in the gym? You have any?
I've got so many. Where do I even start? Tips and tricks to stay motivated in the gym. Challenge someone. Find a friend. Find someone you know on Instagram that you can get some like back and forth with. You can like post videos to and from. Find someone or something that you can challenge yourself with. Having something, lots of little goals to aim for and achieve. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything, silly stuff, fun stuff. Just something that gives you a reason to do things. Challenging a friend, go out for lunch every single Sunday. Go to the gym every Sunday morning. Whoever wins the whatever challenge buys lunch. Stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like some sort of reason to make it fun for yourself. Challenge.
The challenge is really good. So you can challenge someone, or you can just have internal challenges. Like if you're so inclined. Like I'm a competitive person, so I like to look back at what I've done.
You're a competitive person.
So I look back. It's not so much about challenging other people. Like although we have fun challenges and stuff, a lot of it is like, I really want to get this PB this year. And that's enough for me to want to really work hard and get that PB and smash that goal. If you're not so inclined to be personally motivated, then challenging other people and getting a community together that's all doing similar things, that's a great way. Another really fantastic way is to change the emphasis of your training. I've just started doing it. I've added some more strongman events back in. It's been over a decade since I've done strongman, and I'm loving it. I'm 3 weeks in, and I can't believe I haven't trained it in so long. So just by changing your emphasis and how you train or what your end goal might be can really refresh the whole training process for you.
Yeah, it's always hard to say this because it sounds off. It sounds wrong. It sounds like I'm a bit of a dick.
Well,
but the way that I intrinsically motivate myself is that I don't look for things to achieve. I look for people to be better than.
Oh, you do sound like a dick when you say that.
I know, right? But let me explain. I like being good at stuff.
Yeah.
I like being better than other people. First of all, who doesn't like being better than other people, right? What's the point of status? What's the point of achieving and striving? You're not just trying to be the best version of people. Like, be the best version of you. You're trying to climb some sort of status ladder, right? Whether it's getting your name up on a board or winning in a competition or just lifting more than someone else that you see at the gym or like setting yourself those small personal goals. I never run out of people to try and beat, right? If I push myself, I can push myself to my absolute limit. Then I see someone else doing something kind of cool, kind of fun, kind of interesting, and I'm like, that is awesome. How do I do that? How do I be better than them at that? How do I achieve that? And you find someone else and something else, or someone else and something else, and you can do that forever. So that's a way that I motivate myself. I never tell them, and I'm not like, yeah, suck it. I just keep that to myself. But it gives me these little. It's almost like a hologram, like a fake thing, a fake competition that I create in my mind to keep me wanting to push myself and strive for something. It's just trying to pick a person and then just beat them at that.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, there you go. Jess, I hope some of those help you. Ash T says, how do we get family members to practice healthy eating habits?
I was actually thinking about this in the shower earlier.
Well, I don't want to know what you do in the shower, Adrian. I don't care.
Think about the questions from our questions
all
and
right.
answers podcast.
Yeah,
all
yeah.
right?
Bet that's what you do in the shower.
I thought about this a little bit and I landed on lead by example.
Lead by example? That's a great one.
This is from personal experience, and I'm going to start with why I think that, right?
All right.
So I see this, it happened to me a lot, and it happens to a lot of my clients. And I have this conversation over and over and over and over. Perfect example, when I was doing carnivore diet, right? I did that for me. I just wanted to see if it worked. I started off doing it as like an elimination diet, liked it, stuck with it, got super lean, felt really good with it, and just kept doing it. And for a really long time, for about a year solid, I stuck very, very strictly to it. And people would ask me about it, and I never was like, oh, yeah, you should do carnivore, you should do it. I'd be like, you do whatever you want to do. Like, go get some blood tests, but do whatever you want to do. It might not be for you, but I did it for me. And because I was so strict with it, I didn't drink for almost an entire year. I never deviated away from my diet except for like my designated cheat meals. I stuck to my guns. People feel really bad about themselves when you're really good with eating, because people, they always say things like, I'm trying to eat good, but they love their beer or something like that, right? And then when you're really good with your diet, with your nutrition, it makes them feel bad that they're not doing it. So people will try to bully you into stuff.
Be a good example around people.
Exactly. People try and like bully you. They try to like, oh, just have one, just eat this, just eat. And the better you are and the stricter you are and the more solid you are in your convictions, people over time will slowly come around. If you just lead by example and keep doing what you're doing, if you don't falter, people will start to see the benefits. They'll start to slowly warm up to it, and then they'll start to ask questions like, how did you start? Or why did you do this? And they'll start to, you can't force it down people's throat. Mm-hmm. If you make them willing to accept that it can be done and that you actually enjoy it and it makes you feel good, then they're more likely to kind of come around to the idea and then make some changes themselves. So lead by example is a really good one, because I get that with a lot of people, a lot of my clients who start training and getting really good results and feeling fantastic about themselves, and they're doing it for themselves, but other people are seeing that. Mm-hmm. And so slowly over time, everyone around them starts to see that, and then it's
right.
Just...
Okay, so I get the leading by example. My take on it is one, if you're around someone all the time, sure, try to lead by example. Two is give them a logical reason of why they should make changes. And of course you can say, oh, you'll be healthier, this, that, and the other. People are like, oh, I can't lose weight. An example of this would be my mum. She wanted to drop a few kilos. You said, we don't have to do anything drastic. All right? She drinks 3 coffees a day. She had 150 mils of milk in each coffee. And I just sat her down. I said, look at this math. It's so simple. Half the amount of milk you put in each, instead of 150 mils, you do 75. Okay? And we add this up on a daily count, on a weekly count, on a yearly count, and the total number of calories that she would save by just having the amount of milk that she had in her coffee was the equivalent to like 18 to 20 days worth of eating, worth of calorie allowance. Right? She's like, you're telling me if I just half my milk, I could eat for 20 more days and be the same weight? I say, yeah. Or you don't and you lose weight.
Yeah.
And these are small changes,
Or
right?
don't do
And
that.
and she saw it, she did it, and she lost a bunch of weight. All right. So sometimes it's promoting a logical thing, showing them how it would work. But when it comes down to in the end, is the person has to make a change. So again, in our industry, we can recommend people go see a nutritionist, all right? But really, if they're not ready to make the change,
They won't.
you're not going to force them to make the
amount of
change.
times people have come to the gym that I have worked at, paid me money for my advice, and then ignored it, would make you pull your hair out.
Yeah.
Why do you think I am bald? No, it's crazy, really. People know, and people don't care. They are just not willing to.
Change their ways.
But for a lot of reasons as well.
And I think, and
For a
and
lot
some
of
them-
reasons.
Yeah, with a lot of reasons. And again, we're not psychiatrists, so we don't even, like, there's a whole mental aspect
There
to
is. There's quite a big one.
it. And if you don't struggle with it, it's something that you just don't know, right?
Exactly.
So again, I think in the end, try to lead by example.
Yep.
Try to give them a logical reason why. Give them a good example. Give them the advice to be able to go to a nutritionist, to take that next step. Encourage them. But in the end, it comes down to them. Now, we are running low on battery, so I'm just going to push through to the next one. Okay?
Okay.
I'm flashing. Is
the
Maureen.
last one as well.
Yeah, last one. Last question, guys. Maureen says, how do I improve my balance? Okay? And this is a good question. And I'm going to break it down pretty quickly. You can improve your balance, and especially this is really important. It's not just for the developing, like kids and stuff, but if you're getting older as well and you're becoming a higher risk for like falling and stuff like that, balance and proprioception is really important. So how do you improve that? One, strengthen your major muscles by squatting, doing light hex bar deadlifts. You're building your glutes, you're building your hamstrings and quads. You are building all those strong muscles that stabilize you when you're standing there or when you're moving and walking. Two, move to a unilateral balance. So if you're doing Bulgarian split squats, lunges, walking lunges, something that is a unilateral movement, open chain, so not just in a leg press, pushing one way, but where you actually have to balance yourself. That's a great way to then improve the balance. So you improve your major muscle. Then you go unilateral. Two, you might then do, I don't want to say functional, but you can then work on like active balancing. So you could stand on a Bosu ball where it's wobbly and you just have to balance and be still. And that's more of a fine motor tuning. Like you're just getting everything to work a bit more in sync. And then fourth is you can add a stimulus to it, something like throwing and catching a ball while that person is balancing. So there are 4 ways in a nice progression. 1, get a little stronger. 2, make sure you're strong on both your limbs independently of each other. 3, add some actual balance work in. And 4, add a stimulus to try to balance as well at the same time. That would be my suggestion.
I would agree.
Cool. You concur, sir?
I do.
He concurs.
One really interesting one that I stumbled across was functional training. Actually balancing a balance beam, and not like a balance beam high off the ground. Obviously, if you don't have great balance, it's bad for you. Something with lots of support with your hands that you can use to support yourself around you, but standing on something like a rail or something like that. You can get lots of just training rails. It's just a metal beam this high up off the ground, very, very stable. And you just walk across it. Use things that are very, very difficult to balance on and just balance on them. Like
Yeah.
practice the act of actually balancing as well. Yeah, that's kind of a fun one too.
Nice. Awesome. Well, guys, look, I really enjoyed this one. Thank you all for your questions. If you haven't done so already, please like, subscribe, share, comment, give a thumbs up, all that good stuff. And leave us a comment on something you'd like answered on the next question answer podcast.
We like these podcasts. We like these ones. They're quite fun. So ask some interesting questions.
Cool.
All right. The weirder the better. Just some fun stuff. Some fun stuff. Let's do. You know what we should do?
What?
In the next podcast? This is one for everyone watching right now. Okay. We sometimes get silly questions. People write silly stuff on the board in the gym, and we rub them out. Ask your silly questions. We're not going to answer them, but if they're good enough, we'll list out all the silly questions at the start of the next questions and answers podcast, because that would be fun, because people ask some outrageous things.
Cool.
Okay?
All right.
So
I'm down
do
for
that. Let us hear your silly questions.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
See you next time.
Bye-bye. Bye.